So how does fetch work then? As I mentioned, we want to provide a first argument, which is the URL to which this request should be sent. Now that's the URL I got from Firebase, but actually we need to tweak it a little bit. You can add, after the slash here, any identifier of your choice. I'll name it surveys. And then, important, add .json after that. This is not something Vue needs or backends in general need. This .json at the end is just a Firebase specific requirement. When you're working with a different backend, there is a high chance that you don't need it. But for Firebase, we need to add it. And this key here, surveys, that's up to you. Firebase will then automatically create a node in this database and store our data under that node. So that is the first part. Here we got this fetch function. Now, by default, this will try to get data from here. Now here, I don't want to get data, instead I want to send data. So we can pass a second argument to fetch, and that is a JavaScript object where we can configure this request. And here we have a method property which we can set. By default, the value is a string, get, but we can set it to post. And this influences which kind of HTTP request we send. There are get and post requests. Get for getting data, post for posting, so for sending data. And there also are other verbs like delete or patch for deleting and updating. But here we need post to send a new piece of data. And we also need to add some headers, some metadata to this outgoing request. To be precise, we should set the content type header to application/JSON, telling the server that we'll add some data to this request, which will be in the JSON format, which is basically just text, but text formatted in a specific way, which is very easy for machines to parse and read. And that's the next thing we gotta add. We gotta add a body to this request, which is the data we wanna add. And here, of course, that should be my survey results here, the name and the rating. So here I'll add a new JavaScript object as a body, where I set the name to this username and the rating to this chosen rating. So the values which I emitted in the past are now added to this object. And therefore, of course, here it should be entered name. So the values which I submitted before, entered name and chosen rating, these are the values which are now encoded in this object. But that's a JavaScript object. As I just said, we want to send JSON data, and JavaScript has a convenience method we can use for that. There is a JSON object on which you can call the stringify method, to which you can pass your object. And this turns this JavaScript object into this JSON format, into a string that has this format we want to send. And now that will send a HTTP request to Firebase. This also means that we no longer need to emit our custom event here, and hence I will comment out everything that is related to that. And of course, it will also mean that we no longer manage our data here in app.vue. Now we could do that. You could have an application where you want to send a request and still also manage your data locally. That could be a scenario you have. Here, it's just not the scenario I have. So I will comment out the data in AppView, and I will comment out this methods block here with the store survey method, because we'll no longer be doing this locally in our Vue app, at least for this app. We're not going to do it locally anymore, and hence we don't need that data and the methods here anymore. And that also means that we no longer will bind survey submit here on the learning survey, and we will no longer provide results to user experiences. And that, of course, means that inside of user experiences, for the moment, we'll no longer get a value for results. We'll take care about that later. Back to our learning survey. There, we are now sending this HTTP request. Let's see whether that works. Let's save everything, reload this application, and let's submit our survey result here. Now, did it work? let's have a look at Firebase. It should have worked, and here you should see a surveys node where you see this random text, which is definitely different for you, and in there you should see your data. Now this random text is just a unique ID that was automatically generated by Firebase. And that's great, we can later use that ID on the front end. But now here we got our data stored on Firebase. So that's great. How can we now get that data back to the front end when we click this Load Submitted Experience button, which at the moment is not doing anything?